Daimler, Humber, Hillman, Singer, Riley, Rover, Standard, Triumph, Jaguar. 9 names, and every one of them built its cars inside a single English city most people abroad could not locate on a map. Some of those names now belong to luxury brands owned by companies headquartered in Germany and India. Some do not exist at all, dissolved, merged, absorbed, forgotten by everyone except the people who once worked the line. The city that made them was leveled once, in a single night in November of 1940, by hundreds of bombers that left the cathedral roofless and the medieval streets burning. The city rebuilt. It raised a new cathedral beside the ruin of the old one and carved 2 words into the scorched stone behind the altar. What nobody carved into stone was a warning for what came after, because the second collapse did not arrive in one night. It arrived slowly across a decade in the language of balance sheets and workforce reductions, and by the time anyone thought to name what was happening, most of those 9 names were already gone. Chapter 1. The City of 3 Spires. In 1043, Earl Leofric of Mercia and his wife Godgifu found a Benedictine monastery on a stretch of land where 2 small rivers meet, and a market town grows up around the monastery walls, the way market towns always grow around anything that draws strangers and their coin. Legend holds that Godgifu, Lady Godiva in the name history settled on, rode naked through the streets on horseback to shame her husband into lifting a tax he had levied on the townspeople, and that the men of the town, out of decency or fear, shuttered their windows and did not look. No document from the 11th century mentions any of this. The story surfaces centuries later, set down by chroniclers who were not there, and it hardens into something no contemporary record can dislodge. Her statue stands in the city centre today. The legend became the city's oldest brand. By the 14th century, the town has a name, Coventry, and a rank. 4th largest city in England, some 10,000 people, grown rich on wool and the cloth woven from it. 3 medieval spires rise above the wool halls and the dye yards, and merchants who began as men trading fleece now sit at royal councils, lending wool and money to kings who need both. The wool passes through many hands before it becomes a bolt of cloth, sheared, sorted, carded, spun, woven, fulled, dyed. A chain of specialised labour the city organises around itself, 1 guild for each step, 1 street or quarter for each guild. Not a village anymore, an actual mercantile power, one of the handful of English towns wealthy enough to matter to a crown. The wool trade builds the churches. The wool trade builds the guild halls. The wool trade builds a city that assumes, as wealthy cities tend to, its wealth is permanent. It is not. By the 17th century, wool has thinned out as a livelihood, and Coventry does what it will do again across the centuries that follow. It becomes something else. Silk ribbon weaving moves in, then watchmaking beside it, 2 trades demanding the same patient, close focus manual skill that wool never required. Weavers working their looms in garret rooms built with wide windows for the light the work demanded. By the middle of the 19th century, half of Coventry's working population earns its living in the silk trade, thousands of looms running in garrets and back rooms across the city. The watchmakers work smaller still, cutting and fitting balance wheels, hairsprings, escapements, and mainsprings by hand, parts too fine to judge without a loop screwed into the eye socket. By 1860, the watch trade alone counts 90 manufacturers, employing 1,250 craftsmen. Men working to tolerances of fractions of a millimetre, with nothing but eyesight, calipers, and steady hands. Coventry has reinvented itself once already, and prospered. And then, in 1860, a treaty signed in Paris between Britain and France strips away the tariffs that had kept French ribbon out of English shops. Cheap French silk floods the market within months. The ribbon trade, half the city's livelihood, does not decline, it collapses, workshop after workshop going quiet across a handful of seasons. The garret rooms built for the light of close work left to that same light with no one working beneath it, looms standing untouched, shuttles and bobbins pawned or left to gather dust on the frame. The watch trade, already strained, meets its own version of the same fate from a different direction. Swiss factories and American factories building timepieces with interchangeable machine parts, faster and cheaper than any Coventry craftsman working alone at a bench. The calipers and loops and hand lathes of that trade following the ribbon shuttles into pawn shops and attics. Between 1861 and 1871, Coventry's population falls, the first time in its recorded history that people leave the city faster than they arrive in it. Weavers walk out toward Birmingham, toward Manchester, toward whatever work still exists. It is the city's first lesson in what happens when the world changes faster than the workshop. And no one in Coventry in 1871 yet knows that the instrument of the city's next reinvention is already being assembled a few streets away by men who make sewing machines. Chapter 2. The Machine Age. James Starley was a Sussex-born mechanic who left school at 9, worked in turn as a gardener, a footman, and a jack-of-all repairs, and arrived in Coventry with no engineering degree, no patron, and no capital of his own. What he has is a habit of taking apart anything mechanical to see how it holds together, a habit that lands him a post at the Coventry Sewing Machine Company, tinkering with needle bars and treadles. In 1868, that habit turns toward a French import newly arrived on English shores, the velocipede, a wooden-wheeled, iron-rimmed machine that rattles the teeth of anyone who rides it over cobblestone. Starley retools the sewing machine works to build them instead of needles and bobbins. The company that emerges from that decision is the Coventry Machinists, the first bicycle manufacturer in Britain. Starley spends the next decade refining wheels, spokes and gearing, content each year to sell a better machine than the one he sold the year before, until history settles on him a title it rarely hands out twice: Father of the Bicycle Industry. You can trace in the years that follow exactly whose hands build his machines. A wheel built from thin tension spokes demands the same eye a watchmaker trains on a balanced staff. A frame brazed true demands the same patience a silk weaver once spent bent over a loom, thread by thread before the trade collapsed under him. A gear ratio cut to run smooth demands the same tolerance a watch escapement was built to hold. Coventry does not import a workforce for its new industry. It already has one, standing idle in the wake of 1871, and the bicycle absorbs it bench by bench, workshop by workshop, garret by garret. By the 1880s, the city calls itself, without much argument from anywhere else in the world, the cycle capital of the world. Rover began as a bicycle maker, Singer began as a bicycle maker, Humber began as a bicycle maker, and Riley followed a few years after that. One trade built 4 fortunes. Then, in 1885, James Starley's nephew, John Kemp Starley, sets down a design that ends the argument over what a bicycle should look like. 2 wheels of equal size, not the old penny farthing's absurd tower balanced over a small trailing wheel. A chain drive to the rear wheel, taking the pedalling motion off the front axle entirely. A diamond-shaped frame holding the geometry rigid under a rider's full weight. He calls it the Rover Safety Bicycle, and it is not an improvement on the bicycle, an actual template for it. The shape every bicycle built anywhere since has followed, with only the details changed. Coventry has not merely joined an industry it once stumbled into by accident of geography. It has authored the machine that defines it. The workshops keep running through the 1880s and into the 1890s, and the next disused building the city fills is not a wool hall or a ribbon mill, but a 4-story cotton mill standing empty at Draper's Field. In 1896, the company promoter Harry Lawson takes the lease, renames it the Motor Mills, and installs inside it the Daimler Motor Company, Britain's first purpose-built car factory. The floors that once carded and spun raw cotton now hold engine benches and paint sheds. The machinery inside entirely changed. The brick walls around it not changed at all. The machines Lawson brings in are German in design, licensed and adapted for English production, and the men who run the lathes are drawn from the same trade of precision hands Coventry has been training since the looms went quiet 25 years before. The first car built inside the motor mills leaves the works in January 1897. Rattling out through streets, a bicycle boom has already paved with confidence and capital both. Coventry's cycle makers are watching from workshops a few streets away. Ledgers open, calculating what it would cost to follow. Within a decade, one by one, they will. Chapter 3. The Roll Call. Say the names in order and it reads like a regiment mustering for inspection. Daimler, Humber, Hillman, Singer, Riley, Rover, Standard, Triumph, Alvis, Armstrong Siddeley. 10 marks, 1 city, a few hundred yards of Coventry pavement, separating the drawing offices where each was born. Daimler's cars already carry royalty through the 1930s, a coach builder's contract inherited from the Motor Mills years, when a single Panhard license model was a novelty rather than an obligation of the Crown, back when the firm still measured its output in dozens rather than thousands. The firm does not campaign for the warrant, does not advertise it, does not need to. It builds the car, the palace does the rest. A fitter can leave Riley on a Friday and start at Rover on a Monday without changing lodgings or even his omnibus route. The 10 firms drawing on one shared pool of lathes, dies and men. Coventry has a roll call. Reginald Maudslay found Standard in 1903. A young engineer trading on a family name already known in marine engineering, betting against every steamship instinct in his family that the motorcar will outgrow the carriage within a decade. Siegfried Bettmann arrives a decade earlier still, a Nuremberg-born clerk who sold sewing machines before he sold bicycles, and the firm he raises out of that trade becomes Triumph. He is not a hobbyist tinkering after hours, an actual industrialist who will one day wear the mayoral chain through the very streets he helped wire with factories, a Nuremberg accent still audible under the civic robes. Coventry does not ask where a man was born before it hands him a workshop and a line of credit. It asks only whether the order book gets filled, and by whom hardly matters. Bettmann can fill it, and does for 30 years running, a German name presiding over an English trade. No one questions it yet. In 1928, William Lyons brings his sidecar business down from Blackpool, a bet on a city that already knows how to build a chassis better than it knows how to build anything else. Swallow becomes SS cars within the decade, styled bodies over standard running gear, cheap elegance sold to men who cannot afford the real thing. After the war, the initials go, embarrassed by their wartime echo, and the name that survives is Jaguar. So the most photographed badge in British motoring, the one that will outlast every rationing coupon and every scrap metal drive still to come, is not a London name or a Birmingham name. It is a Coventry badge, stamped in a city most of its future buyers could not find on a map. Lyons buys his engines from Standard down the road, borrowing a gearbox the way every small firm here borrows a part from a larger neighbour and calls it independence. The badge is Coventry's alone. Picture the boomtown itself, half-timbered streets left over from the wool centuries standing wall to wall with new machine shops, Daimler bays and Standard sheds crowding out the almshouses block by block. By 1939, the motor trade alone employs 38,000 people here, and the city grows faster than almost anywhere else in interwar Britain. Men come down from the Rhondda valleys for machine shop wages. Men come from the Clyde shipyards for machine shop wages. Men come from Cork and Donegal for machine shop wages. The coalfields and the shipyards can no longer match. Coventry absorbs them the way it absorbed Bettmann, without ceremony, without a welcome committee, without asking what a man's accent says about him. Put to work by Monday morning, none of it goes unnoticed in Whitehall. From 1936, the government builds shadow factories around the city's edge, managed by Standard, Daimler and Roots. Insurance against a war London still hopes to avoid. By October 1937, 5 of these Coventry shadow plants are already turning out components for the Bristol Mercury aircraft engine. Precision work handed to men who learned their trade on Rover gearboxes and Riley crankshafts. Roots will later claim its own shadow plants alone build one of every 7 bombers to wear an RAF roundel. Nobody clocking in at Alvis or Armstrong Siddeley is doing that arithmetic yet, and no one in Whitehall is explaining it to them. The roll call that made Coventry rich is quietly becoming a target list. November 1940 is not far off. Chapter 4. The Longest Night. November 14th, 1940. The Luftwaffe calls it Operation Moonlight Sonata, a name chosen for the full moon that will light the target below. 515 bombers cross the channel that evening, wave after wave, timed to arrive without pause. They fly over Coventry for 11 hours, not a raid in the ordinary sense, a siege from above conducted on a schedule. The city's own geography, the tight core built for looms and wool merchants 6 centuries earlier, now works against it. Narrow streets, close-set timber, nothing to stop a fire from finding its neighbour. By the time the last aircraft turns for home, the centre of Coventry no longer has a shape. More than 550 people die that night. More than 4,300 homes are destroyed. Something close to 2/3 of the city's buildings are damaged, some to rubble, some merely gutted and left standing as shells with the sky visible through their windows. The figures arrive in the official count over the following days, revised upward as searchers work through collapsed cellars and buried shelters. No single number captures it because the destruction is not concentrated on one street or one district. It is general. That is the design. St. Michael's burns with the rest of it. The cathedral has stood since the 14th century, one of the three medieval spires that gave the old city its skyline. The spires a visitor could pick out from any approach road, unchanged for 500 years. By morning, only the spire and the outer walls remain upright. The roof, the timber, the interior are gone. It becomes and remains the only English cathedral destroyed in the Second World War. The stonework stands through the winter without a roof, open to the weather, a shell holding its own outline. Berlin does not simply record the raid as a success. It produces a word for it. Coventryieren, to coventrate, enters the German vocabulary within days. A verb built from the name of an English city and meaning plainly to annihilate a place from the air, not a tactic anymore, an actual verb conjugated, filed away for use against the next target. Language usually arrives after the fact to describe what happened. Here the fact becomes the language. 808 of the dead are buried together at London Road Cemetery in a mass grave dug because there is no other way to manage the number in the time available. There are no separate services for most of them. The names are recorded, the burial is collective. This is the hard centre of the chapter, stated once, without ornament, and then left where it lies. The morning after, people walk to work. Not out of ceremony, because the factories are still there, or enough of them, and the factories are the only thing left that pays. Machine tools are dragged out from under collapsed roofs, wiped down, wired back into production lines that no longer have proper walls around them. Aircraft engine output, halted for days, is running again within weeks. The Germans return in April 1941 with another heavy raid. By then the shadow factories, dispersed, duplicated, spread across the region since 1937, mean there is no single building left whose loss can stop the line entirely. Coventry ends the war with its centre flattened and its industry intact, which is the precise reverse of what the raid was built to achieve. The cathedral stands roofless through the peace that follows, its ruin left deliberately unrepaired for the moment. Somewhere in the cleared ground beside it, plans are already being drawn for what comes next. Chapter 5. The Precinct and the Ruin. Donald Gibson had already drawn the plans, not after the raid, before it. In 1940, the city architect had proposed clearing Coventry's medieval tangle of lanes, market stalls and blind alleys to open a centre that had been choking on its own age since before the war began. The Luftwaffe did not know this when it came in November. It burned a city whose demolition was already on paper, already costed, already waiting on a council vote. The bombs did the clearing Gibson could not get funded. What rises afterward is not a shopping street. It is an actual precinct, closed to traffic, walked rather than driven. The Upper Precinct, one of the first pedestrianised shopping developments built in post-war Europe. Shoppers move through it on foot, past window displays lit without the diesel haze of buses idling at the curb, past benches set into the paving where a person can simply sit and watch the crowd move rather than dodge it. Around it, the city assembles a small catalogue of the modern, rooftop parking decks that let a driver leave the car above street level and descend into the shops by stair, a circular indoor market roofed in concrete and glass, its stalls arranged like spokes around a hub. Butchers and fishmongers and flower sellers working within shouting distance of one another for the first time since the old market burned. Glass-fronted shops stack in terraces above the old street line, their upper floors given over to flats with balconies looking down on the crowds below. Concrete replaces timber framing, plate glass replaces leaded panes, and the effect, deliberate on Gibson's part, is of a city that has stopped apologising for being modern. In 1958, the Belgrade Theatre opens, the first civic theatre built in Britain since the war, named for the Yugoslav city that had donated timber for its construction. Planners from other bombed cities come to look, notebooks out asking the same three questions. How is it zoned? How is it funded? How is it built this fast? For a decade, Coventry is not a cautionary tale. It is a syllabus. Then the competition. Over 200 entries, architects from across the country submitting visions for what should stand beside, not replace, the gutted shell of St. Michael's. The winner is Basil Spence, a Scottish architect who had served in the war and who proposes something almost nobody else does: leave the ruin standing. Do not clear it. Join a new cathedral to it at a right angle. Glass wall facing glass wall so that a visitor entering the new nave sees the old one's blackened tracery through the window. Always, without needing to be told what it once was. Spence does not build alone. He brings in painters, sculptors, and glaziers the way Gibson had brought in planners, commissioning Graham Sutherland for a tapestry of Christ in glory to hang behind the altar, vast enough to be the first thing the eye finds on entering, and John Hutton for a west screen of engraved glass, saints and angels, scratched into panels the height of the building itself, so that a visitor looks through the dead toward the living congregation and back again. By the late 1950s, Coventry has become something more than a rebuilt city. A laboratory of post-war planning, collecting serious artists now the way it once collected machine tools. On May 25, 1962, the new Coventry Cathedral is consecrated. The ruin beside it is now formally a garden of remembrance, roofless, walled by the same red sandstone that burned in 1940. Its floor, the same floor 808 bodies were carried across on their way to London Road Cemetery. Days later, in the new building, Benjamin Britten's War Requiem receives its premiere, a work commissioned for this consecration and scored deliberately for an English tenor, a German baritone, and a Russian soprano, three nations that had spent 6 years trying to kill each other's sons, singing together under one roof. A city that had spent a century making tanks, engines, and machine tools becomes, for one spring, the place the world points to when it wants to talk about forgiveness. None of it makes the cathedral's insurers stop asking questions, and none of it rebuilds a street on its own. But something has shifted in how the city is discussed, in London and beyond it. The word used now is not survivor, it is model. And model cities, it turns out, are exactly the kind that get chosen next, for investment, for expansion, for the sort of boom that does not announce itself until the wage packets and the population figures are already climbing past anything the pre-war city had ever seen. Chapter 6. The Golden Age. By the late 1960s, Coventry's population climbs past 335,000, a figure the pre-war city never approached even at its most optimistic. The wage packets climb faster still. A man on the line at Standard Triumph or Roots can out-earn the school teacher who taught him, out-earn the bank clerk who banks his pay, out-earn the shopkeeper his own father once envied. Word travels through the schools before it reaches the newspapers. Boys walk out of the classroom on a Friday afternoon and walk into the plants on Monday morning, 16 years old, straight onto a wage their fathers took 2 decades to reach. The factories run at capacity, not busy, an actual capacity, lines moving day and night, order books stretching past what the assembly halls can physically hold. Standard Triumph, Roots, Jaguar, Alvis, Daimler. 5 names, 5 marks, all drawing from the same pool of Coventry hands, all bidding against each other for the same skilled men. Overtime is not requested here, it is assumed. A second job is not ambition. It is Tuesday. Picture Broadgate on a Saturday evening in 1964. The Godiva statue stands lit beneath the new Precincts lamps. Bronze and legend and civic marketing all at once. The way she has stood in for this city since long before anyone thought to build a factory here. Around her the showroom windows glow. Triumph heralds, Hillman imps, paintwork catching the light. And past the glass walk the very men who built them, off shift now, jackets over their arms in the July warmth, some heading home, some heading out for the evening. They do not stop to look. They built the thing already. The looking is for visitors and for other people's children. 9 of every 10 working men in the city depend on the motor trade, directly or through the trades that feed it. The tool rooms, the component shops, the haulage firms running parts between plants that sit, sometimes streets apart. The dependency is total and almost invisible, the way air is invisible. Nobody in Broadgate on a Saturday evening stops to ask what happens if the motor trade catches a cold. Nothing in living memory has suggested that it needs to. Beneath the wage packets, though, the arithmetic is quietly turning. Coventry's firms are small against the scale of Detroit or Wolfsburg. Proud names, old names, chronically underinvested names, and each is discovering in its own boardroom that growth now means selling rather than building. The mergers that follow are not the mergers of strength. They are the mergers of companies that can no longer stand alone, arranged by men who have decided this is better than standing still. Roots sells its remaining shares to Chrysler between 1964 and 1967, an American name settling into offices a Coventry family once held. In 1968, the rest of the industry is gathered up by a different route into a single conglomerate. It takes the name British Leyland. Chapter 7. The Unraveling. The 1970s arrive with a bill nobody in Coventry expected to pay this soon. Oil prices quadruple in 1973, and the cost of building a car rises with them, steel and rubber and paint, all pricier by the month. The margins that used to cushion a bad quarter, gone within one. Strikes idle assembly lines for weeks at a stretch at Standard Triumph, at Roots, across the trade, over pay grades, over piecework rates, over demarcations nobody outside the plant could explain. A stalled line means half-finished shells sitting in the jigs exactly where the shift left them, doors off, wiring looms hanging loose, paint booths cold and silent, the whole building holding a kind of stillness it was never built to hold. Men clock in to stand beside cars that are not moving, then clock out again at the end of the shift, no different than if they had never come at all. Foremen walk the line each morning, counting the same unfinished bodies as the morning before, waiting on a settlement in a dispute 2 departments away that has nothing to do with them and everything to do with them. The models on the line have not changed in a decade. Japanese imports arrive cheaper, better assembled, more reliable, and Coventry has no answer for any of it. British Leyland runs out of road. In 1975, the government nationalises the company to stop it collapsing outright, pouring in public money to keep the doors open. Fleet Street calls it a rescue. In Coventry, it arrives dressed as restructuring, as rationalisation, as a 5-year plan for viability that keeps sliding by another year, each revision thinner than the last, each one promising that this time the bleeding stops here. Each one believed a little less than the one before it. Workers learn the language by instinct, the way any workforce learns to read a verdict before it is announced. Consolidation means a line stops somewhere. Phased withdrawal means the notice comes later instead of never. Viability review means someone has already decided and is only choosing the month. It is not a rescue. It is an actual execution conducted in installments, spread out too slowly to make a single headline. Fewer jobs every year. British Leyland's Coventry workforce falls from 27,000 to 8,000 between 1975 and 1982. 19,000 jobs erased in 7 years, inside one company, in one city. Across the same period, the 15 largest firms in Coventry shed roughly 55,000 jobs between them, a toll that touches nearly every household with someone on a factory floor, uncles and neighbours and men from the same street who once compared shift patterns over the fence. By 1982, unemployment in the city approaches 20%, among the worst of any city in Britain. The boys who once walked from the classroom straight into the plants now walk from the plants into the dole queue, past the same gates, past the same clocking-in machines, standing idle. Same route, opposite direction. In June 1981, a band formed in this city puts the city on every radio in Britain. The Specials release Ghost Town, and it reaches number 1 the same month riots break out in Brixton, in Toxteth, in Handsworth. The sound is sparse, reggae-inflected, built around a wailing organ line that never resolves into anything like relief, more dirge than single. They wrote it about home, the shut clubs, the empty upper precinct, the boarded windows, the anger with nowhere left to go. Not a protest song, an actual inventory of what the city has already lost by name. For 3 weeks it plays like an obituary read aloud, city by city, radio by radio, Coventry's own. The song falls off the charts within the month. The unemployment does not fall with it. Through the rest of the decade, the workforce keeps shrinking, plant by plant, announcement by announcement, and nobody left on the factory floor believes 1982 is the bottom. It is not. The worst of it, the closures with names attached, the ones that end things for good, has not happened yet. Chapter 8, What Remains. The closures come one by one, each one announced as the last. In 1983, the Triumph motorcycle works in the village of Meriden, just outside Coventry, goes bankrupt and is demolished. In 2005, Ford ends Jaguar assembly at Browns Lane, the plant that built the E-Type, the car that outran every reputation the city built after it. On December 12, 2006, Peugeot closes the former Roots plant at Ryton, on the southern edge of Coventry, and 2,300 jobs go with it in a single sitting of the board. It is the last volume car plant in the Coventry area. When it falls silent, nothing replaces it. The Coventry Transport Museum on Millennium Place in the city centre holds what the city can no longer make. Daimlers under glass, Humbers restored to a shine they never carried on the line, Jaguars from every decade of the marque's life, and beside them, Thrust 2 and Thrust SSC, the two cars that broke the land speed record and now sit still. Jaguar Land Rover still designs and engineers cars at Whitley. There the drawings happen, there the data happen, there the decisions happen. The assembly lines do not. Warwick and Coventry University together now make up the city's largest industry, teaching more students than the motor trade employed at the height of its power. A workforce of undergraduates and postgraduates where there used to be a workforce of turners and fitters and line hands. The trade required an apprenticeship. The university requires a UCAS form. Coventry has not stopped training people for work. It has changed what the work is. On the edge of the city at Anstey, the London Electric Vehicle Company builds electric black cabs in a plant backed by more than £500 million of Chinese investment. Every new London taxi is Coventry built. It is not a revival of the old trade. It is an actual production line, running shifts, meeting quotas, paying wages into an economy that has been waiting for one since Wrighton closed. In 2021, Coventry serves as UK City of Culture. And the city sells its history as its product, the way it once sold ribbons and bicycles and cars as products. The trade that defined Coventry survives, in miniature. Two cathedrals still stand side by side on the hill above the city centre. The medieval one is a shell, roofless. Its arches open straight to the sky since the raid of November 1940. And the 1962 cathedral is joined to it at the porch, glass and concrete meeting scorched sandstone in a single, continuous wall. Tourists photograph the ruin in the morning light, framed by the three spires that watch the wool leave. The ribbons fail, the bicycles multiply, and the cars go. Inside the ruin, the charred cross still stands on the old altar, and behind it, cut into the stone, two words, Father, forgive. In certain light, the ruin and the new cathedral read as a single building, one structure with a beginning and an end fused at the seam, and from a distance it is impossible to tell which half is rising and which half is falling. Above both, the same sky.